Welcome back. This is an update to my video Democrats Don't Learn, and it's not uplifting. Despite the violent way Trump has tried to overwhelm institutions in little more than 7 months, Democrats still show that they don't get it. And the latest trumpet sound in this long list of apocalyptic signs is the terrible position of Democrats on voter registration. The other sign was the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries' reaction to Trump's attempt at firing Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook after his attempt to find cause to fire Powell on July 25, as you might remember, and after actually firing the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics on August 1st. As delicate as the situation is, considering the stagflationary pressures Trump's tariffs and deportations are putting on the economy, past demands from him to dictate monetary policy, the disruption of other institutions by Dodge and his budget bill, the precedent of Nixon, who put a more docile Fed sheriff before his 1972 re-election, so paving the way for the magnitude of the 1970s stagflation. The point Jeffries decided to highlight was that Trump was attempting to fire the first African American woman nominated to Federal Reserve Governor. In other words, the appeal to identity politics, despite the 2024 electoral results, took primacy to the economic implications of this gross attempt at taming the Federal Reserve. And just in case, when I mean stagflation, there is the risk of a mild stagflation, that is a situation in which unemployment rises, the labor market is cooling down significantly, while prices rise as we are starting to see after wave after wave of tariffs that, of course, at some point had to have some effect on prices. But that's not all. Here, unfortunately, Democrats have not been able to exploit the effects of Trump's on Medicaid in purple and red states that, on top of inflation, will now have to deal with losing health coverage. Then you have DNC's inability to craft even a statement on the critical situation of the Gaza war, whose episodes of ethnic cleansing and starvation are a consequence of the unacceptably mediocre handling of the issue by Biden. So you would say Democrats have a moral obligation to tackle this issue. Well, no, they cannot get even that right, which only follows their inability to defend Obama's nuclear deal with Iran, another consequence of Biden's blind support for Netanyahu. And yes, foreign policy is not a salient issue among the working class, which Democrats lost in 2024 in their equally unacceptably naive belief that their pandering to woke activists was going to more than compensate for any loss Democrats had among the working class. But this is just another example that is hard to ignore, and one that shows the poor leadership of Ken Martin as head of the DNC. No surprise he wasted millions on a plan to find out how to talk to men. and the implementation ended up being even more laughable. They hired, before they had to fire her due to public outrage, Olivia Juliana to implement such plan. Olivia Juliana is a well-known woke activist, precisely what irritates the working class, precisely what has alienated the working class. And when it comes to leadership, Schumer does not do better. He does even worse. It's hard to forget his foolish vote for the continuing resolution that allowed Trump not only to keep the government open, but also to move funds among appropriations approved by Congress, which makes unsurprising that the apportionment website that would have revealed how those funds were finally allocated was also shut down. And then we have Schumer's contribution to the fight against Trump's budget bill, changing the name of the bill. Or we could also mention Schumer's response when asked what Democrats plan to do to counter Trump's policies, and his answer was to send Trump a very strong letter. Yet, we also have a problem with the left. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, different from Bernie, has so far not drawn a clear line with the woke left that alienated so many among the working class. Then, unless you want to be branded the same way the Tories have branded the Labour Party in England, that is, you can trust Labour with the economy, you have to propose not only things that poll well, but also that you can really fix. In the case of Mamdani in New York, his affordable housing program would cost $100 billion over 10 years and require new debt for New York for $70 billion. And of course, failing to get even close to his target will create a backlash against his policies. However, this is not an excuse for Democratic leaders who have refused to enforce Mandani to try to root the elected candidate Mandani in a more reasonable in a more reasonable course of action. I disagree with Mandani's policies. But if that's the case of Jeffrey, Schumer, and Martin, if the reason to not endorse Mandani is that they disagree with his policies, they should try to persuade Mamdani to improve his policy proposals, which they have not done, instead of going directly to spoiling his chances with Adams and Cuomo candidacies, much less using an issue, Israel, that has little to do with the bread and butter issues that got Mandani elected in the primaries in the first place, to sink his chances to win the mayoral race. When it comes to housing, Mamdani would do better starting with tackling on NIMBYism to increase supply, and only then present a plan that can provide affordable housing without repeating the mistakes made by California, where the homeless program has cost $24 billion with only marginal benefits for the homeless. Actually, homelessness has grown in California. Otherwise, Mamdani's failure will be used as ammunition against his own cause, as the fall of Solindra was used as ammunition against grain projects during the Obama administration, despite the fact that the program as a whole, the program of which Solindra was just one program, one part, as a whole, was successful. Another reason why Mamdani's failure will be tragic is that he won the New York primaries fair and square by speaking about bread and butter issues, while Cuomo's message, as Democrats did in 2024 and keep doing, unfortunately, was reminding over and over that was reminding voters over and over that Trump is bad. Even his supporters know that Trump is bad and still don't regret their vote. Besides, when you try to sabotage Mandani after having won fair and square a primary, you remind voters of what happened with Harris, who was anointed a candidate without a primary. And many voters resent that part. So you are reviving in the minds of the voters your past mistakes over and over, expecting different results. Thus, Democrats are still trapped in a world of donors and consultants that make them look weak and detached, to which Democrats many times have reacted by blaming the voters. Add to these episodes like Democrats losing a third vote in the Senate because Sheldon Whitehouse was absent, was not there, even though this was such an important vote. Or Buttigieg spinning over and over his answer to a question over Israel in a recent interview, making the whole even deeper instead of trying to do admitting that he misspoke or any other thing any normal human being would do in such a circumstance. So we have a problem with leadership, but the problem is not leadership. Is much deeper. Despite having traditions about the role of government, from FDR's New Deal to Al Gore's in reinventing government, they have been unable to counter Trump's Dodge narrative with one of their own. Thus, despite Trump's traumatic policies on immigration and the economy, all Democrats can say is that Trump is bad. Besides, you just had to see what Democrats consultants did to Tim Walz in his debate with J.D. Vance to see how these experts turned Walz, who had a prestige of being a warrior, into a wimp who couldn't beat J.D. Vance. Yes, the same J.D. Vance who already had admitted that the Republicans knew they were lying about immigrants eating pets, because immigration was Trump's top issue. And finally lost after trying to spin his answer about Tiananmen in a ridiculous way instead of admitting, as he had to do in the follow-up, that he had misspoke. And this, not to mention what these experts did to the Harris campaign, which, after starting on the right foot with an economic populist message, ended up tying herself to the current status quo, Biden, and the old status quo, Liz Cheney, and cloistering, limiting her economic message to the echo chamber of rallies, or while every time she had access to the press, she tried to confirm her her validation of the status quo. In the worst and in the worst episodes was in the View, when she admitted that there was nothing she would have done different from Biden, and that was the end of her populist message. Or consider the way they refused free press like Joe Rogan's, preferring instead the friendly shows nobody watches or only her more fervent supporters watch, and finally turning her campaign into a celebrity extravaganza. in the first case, she won no votes because those shows were watched. The friendly shows were watched for people who was going to vote for her anyway, and this, while the celebrity extravaganza created irritation among those she had to persuade. It's very telling that both Clinton and Harris raised more money than Trump, and yet both lost the elections after winning the debates. And yet, however, the repudiation Democrats suffered in 2024, where Harris lost with the popular vote for more than 2 million votes. The only precedent in recent decades is Kerry, who lost the popular vote for about 500,000 votes. Democrats are unable to rebuke the bad parts of Biden's policies, to admit they are unable to admit that they were wrong, to rescue, because that's the only way they can rescue the good parts of Biden's policies, and request a second chance. So these experts still insist in ignoring the FDR's advice that if you have been wrong, admit it frankly and try something else. And this is critical considering that the Republican alternative, if not Jeff Bush or John Kasich, but Donald Trump, or his continuation, whether he runs again in 2028 or he anoints some other MAGA person who will have nothing to do with the original Republican Party. So the this is part of the problem that is linked to these experts that dismiss FDR's advice, the same FDR who won a popular vote for 4 times and was elected for 4 terms, while they have not been able to keep the White House for more than one. The other recurrent characteristic of Democrats' image is weakness. They project weakness. While Trump ignores core decisions more blatantly on immigration, and FDR was not afraid of fighting the extremely conservative Supreme Court of his time, but got results. Just consider the case of Tipaldo. Biden lived always in fear of the Supreme Court and ended up mutilating his own programs in order to avoid fights with the Supreme Court in a disgraceful way that dishonors the memory of FDR. And we can see the effect of this perceived weakness in Trump's arbitrary attempt at forcing mid-decade redistricting in Texas, and apparently also in Missouri. Apparently Missouri is next, in order to secure the House in 2026, regardless of how low his popularity falls. Another related episode of democratic weakness is Trump using the National Guard, federalizing the National Guard in Los Angeles, the District of Columbia, and soon in Chicago, according to Trump's threat, which has exposed the weakness of the Democratic Party, as the immigrant busing by DeSantis and Abbott exposed how detached Democrats were on immigration after Biden outsourced this issue to abolish ICE, with the consequences we all know. A Democratic senator has already described this trend in the image of the Democratic Party as weak and woke. And that's not the whole answer, but it's a good part of the answer. When it comes to gerrymandering the next midterms, let's remember that in Texas, Democratic lawmakers walk out from the Texan Capitol to deny quorum to Republicans and so prevent the arbitrary gerrymandering they were planning. They left for states like Illinois, from where Abbott would not be able to force them to return. But then, after a few days, what so far had been a patriotic stand became a temper tantrum when they meekly returned to Texas, so giving Republicans the quorum they needed and the abusing redistricting that should give Trump 5 more seats in Congress in 2026 passed and became law. If you are going to walk out in such a serious matter, then don't return submissively a few days later. That projects weakness. If that's so serious, why are you returning? So, and if you don't intend to go the whole mile, then just don't leave. Try to use a lawsuit, even if you know the Supreme Court is going to probably dismiss it because we have a Supreme Court that is very permissive with Trump, but at least you will not look ridiculous. If you leave, then stay outside and deny then the quorum. And if not, if you so don't return. And if you stay, well, at least you will not look weak. And especially because this in this matter, Democrats are right. So states are allowed to redraw their districts after every decade after the census. And regardless of who has done this before, the fact of the matter is that this redistricting, the mid-decade redistricting, is abusive and arbitrary. But now the focus of the discussion is going to be, well, Democrats did their temper tantrum, express themselves, and then they return to let the Republicans pass the gerrymandering anyway. So was it that important or not? Don't project weakness in such a pitiful way. Finally, when it comes to Latinos, a constituency where Harris had serious losses in 2024, especially among male Hispanics, Democrats seem to bet that they can play dead and hide until Trump's numbers keep falling, probably until under the 40s or whatever they are waiting for, even though Trump's approval and disapproval have stabilized, despite the fact that the effects of his policies on prices have already started to become evident on the ugly side of his presidency, from deportations to arbitrary mid-decade redistricting to the federalizing of the National Guard in rival cities for political gain, are already visible. So, and probably that those numbers, hopefully, they are going to keep falling after prices are after the effects of tariffs in prices are more visible, but probably many people are going to adopt a terrible alternative apathy, and those Trump's number are going to keep stabilizing and denying Democrats the opening they are looking for, supposedly. The tragic part of all this is that Democrats are playing with fire. And when they play with fire, it's us who will get burned. If the next 2026 midterms are dominated by local issues and gerrymandering, of course, we may not see the consequences of Democrats' irresponsible bet until 2028. in which case a low turnout election may favor Trump's successor or even Trump himself. Who knows? Because we considering how friendly the Supreme Court has been withdrawn, you can't discard that possibility regardless of what you can read in the Constitution. So if one lesson we can get from Mandani from these polls is that Democrats must have a message about bread and butter issues now. The trust in government is at all times low. So don't try to run on democracy on other issues, which as important as they are, as not selling. Finally, remember the lessons of political marketing. It's not enough that an issue is polling well. It must be salient, remember John Saller, and it must be determinant of the vote, remember Anthony Salvanto. So, and if you watch this video and you have a chance to have a voice that can be heard more than mine, remember that remember candidates that these experts are only regurgitating what the first thing that crosses their mind after drinking their frappuccino. In other words, they don't know what they are talking about. And why do I ask you to remember Democratic candidates that they are surrounded by imbeciles? Is that then these next elections, and especially 2028, are going to be very critical, and that we cannot trust the Democratic Party to save us if we don't save the Democratic Party from itself. And having said that, thank you.
And now, an important message from the Democratic Party.
They want to take away our protections for their profit? We have a saying for that. Come and take it. Come and take it.
We are not leaving. We are not leaving. We are not leaving. We are not leaving.
I feel like going on. Sing with us.
This little light of ours, we're gonna let it shine.